Hello, and welcome back around the Bonfire. It is a pleasure to have you on a Victory Sunday here in Chicago. This is the show reminding you that the P in MVP actually stands for Philip Zinkernagel. I don't know if you guys were familiar, but that's what that means. It's a joy to be back. A Chicago Fire held off a, let's just say, sad Charlotte side, sad from their loss. After a 3-2 win at Soldier Field, getting their second home victory of the year. I am joined, as always, by two of the best in the business. I've got Tim Hutsey with me. Tim, how are we feeling on this fine Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, good win. That's nice. Like it just doesn't it just like lift your spirits a little bit when you don't see a bunch of people leaving Soldier Field depressed, like looking down at their shoes, like Charlie after trying to kick the football.
Yeah. What is that, like 17 to 30, like 25 Sundays a year? You see people depressed at Soldier Field. So thankfully, this was not one of them. Alan,
are you including after, before, during, and after the Beyonce concerts with that, or?
I was counting Bears games, but yeah, that could count as well, depending on how you feel about Beyonce. Alan is here as well. Alan, how are we feeling on this Sunday?
Man, I'm feeling good, like we should. We saw the return of shirtless sax man, so always a good time.
Alan casually plugging that he wants you to see him with the shirt off. Love that for you, Alan. We are unfortunately down to DJ today, so DJ, shout out you. We're sad you're not here, but we are going to keep on rocking and rolling and doing all the fun stuff because, as we've said multiple times at this point, Chicago Fire won last night. It was a 3-2 win over Charlotte FC at home, something that has long plagued the Fire, not being able to win games at home. Before we talk a little bit more about it, a quick little hit of news. Inter Miami is out at the Club World Cup after a loss to PSG, ending MLS's participation in the tournament. Fellas, I don't know if you have anything you want to say about that. The only thing I can say is like, oh my God, I can't believe the 7th best team in MLS lost to the Champions League final winner. Like, oh, that's so crazy. I can't believe that happened.
I'm just kind of glad that there will no longer be a giant thing when you go to MLSsoccer.com that talks about the next Club World Cup game at the top while there's actually games going on, as we encountered in the press box last night when trying to look up the league's official stats for some stuff. So, hey, I'll take it.
2 words. Womp womp.
Well, there we go. And now the U.S. men's national team will also face off in the Gold Cup knockout round shortly after recording. So by the time you're listening, you know how that turned out. Hopefully a W for the boys. There is the homer part of me that wants them to lose, so Chris Brady comes back. But we'll push that off for just a little longer. They're facing Costa Rica, and as Tim noted in the notes here, Francisco Calvo tonight. So hope you tuned into that.
Yeah, I was going to say the other homer part, just like seeing Francisco Calvo suffer when in a national team shirt after the way that he would play like a ridiculously talented center back and devil for the Ticos, and then come back in a Fire shirt and play awesome for half an hour, then like look down at the shirt and be like, oh yeah, it's that crest that I'm wearing.
And then he gets a red
just
card.
Drop. Yeah. Yeah. And then get the red card. Yeah.
Speaking of, guys who were great with their national teams and not with the Fire, that reminds me of Xherdan Shaqiri, which also reminds me to plug. We were lucky enough to be featured on a Swedish soccer podcast, Soccer Brun, this week. So that episode will be coming out later this week. It was myself and the gentleman who runs the pod, Johan Dykhoff. So it'll come out, I believe he said Wednesday or Thursday of this later week. So just keep an eye on that for socials. It was a really fun conversation from a guy who's been watching this league from Sweden for like 16, 17 years. Really interesting conversation.
John, you speak Swedish?
Yeah, fluent. Very much fluent. I would do a fake Swedish thing right now, but I feel like that would actually get me in trouble, so I won't.
He watched a lot of the Muppets, and the Swedish chef was the inspiration. Yeah.
The only Swedish I know is from Eurovision. So
you know what occurred to me, like also talking about like ringing up Europe and, Switzerland. As of the date that this episode is coming out, Joe Mansueto will no longer be paying Kasper Shibilko or Ignacio Aliseda. They will be free agents. They could get re-signed by Lugano. I doubt it, but they will no longer be in the employ of either of Joe Mansueto's teams for the first time in a number of years.
Wow.
I do think that is good news. The other 2 pieces of good news that I'll actually share before we get into the actual ball talk here, and then we'll kind of move on quickly. Georgios Koutsias clearly reportedly drawing some interest from a few different sides, some in Greece, some in others in Europe. The Fire looking to actually get a fee for the youngster that they moved over to Lugano at the end of last season. So that could be exciting. And then there were some reports that a couple of different, I think it was French teams, I know Lens was one of them, were looking at Carlos Teran this week as well. So more transfer news around the young Colombian who has struggled to stay on the field. So could be two big moves for the Fire as we look towards the start of the summer window on July 24th. But for now,
Yep.
and we'll move on. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, just one thing on Koutsias. So if the Fire do sell him to, because he's on loan from the Fire, if the Fire do sell him to another team in Europe, the transfer fee, after, if it was above a certain amount, right, given his acquisition costs and stuff like that, would come to the Fire and GAM up to $3 million, which would be very useful for the Fire's cap position. He's under contract for another 18 months. So this would be the ideal window because you're not going to get much of a transfer fee if you hold off until next summer when he's free and 6 months after that anyways, with the contract expiring in 26.
Absolutely. And if I'm remembering correctly, I do think a good part of the discussions that I read about, and I'm a little bit of secondhand news reporting here, but it did seem like offers were coming around that €5 million mark, and the Fire were hoping for closer to 7 to 8 to possibly 10. So I wonder how much of that is going to be determined by, can we also get a little bit of GAM out of this?
Yeah, well, $5 million would be enough to maximize the team's GAM based on what we know about the transfer value, but like still getting more money. I mean, more money is more money, right? So hey.
Give us that MLS funny money.
Yeah. Absolutely. But speaking of MLS funny money, we're going to talk a little bit about Charlotte now. Fire win 3-2 over Charlotte FC at home. It's their second home win of the year. Philip Zinkernagel kicked off the scoring on what was the most impressive single person effort that I've ever seen have an assist attached to it. Johnathan Dean accredited with the assist there, ironically enough, but Zinkernagel takes it darn near the length of the pitch and scores in the 23rd minute. Brian Gutierrez then gets one of his own 2 minutes later off an assist from Philip Zinkernagel, and Hugo Kuipers ends the scoring for the Fire in the 33rd minute, where he put in his 11th of the season. In the second half, Charlotte did make things interesting. Pep Biel scoring in the 56th minute, and again, in quick succession, Toklamati putting one in the 59th. But as we will talk about here in a moment, the Chicago Fire held on to win 3-2. They improved to 8-4-7, 8 wins, 4 draws, 7 losses. They have 28 points, which does put them firmly into a playoff position. One spot behind Miami, who has played now 3 less games than the Fire due to Club World Cup participation. And this does mean that they have the second most goals in MLS, just behind San Diego. So an impressive showing from the Fire to stomp out Charlotte, winning that season series pretty handily. Tim, I feel like you've got something to add. I can see a look on your face. General thoughts and vibes on the game overall, if you have something.
No, just Dean was not initially credited with the assist. I think that was added after the fact, and it was some point of discussion in the press box because at first we were hearing that a Charlotte player got a toe on it at some point between the time that it left Dean's foot to the time that it made it to Zinkernagel's, and we were like, "There's no way that happened."
Yeah. Even if you watch the replay of the goal, it's kind of like, wow, I can't believe it was a nice pass. It was a good play, but I can't believe they gave him that assist. But as the Johnathan Dean truther of the bunch, I will take that 7 days a week, 100%.
Yeah, man of the match performance for him, according to Greg Berhalter. He got the game ball after and just. He contributed on both sides of the pitch. So it was great talking to him after the match and just seeing the growth that we've seen from him. Like, he's been asked to play at a higher level than what we've seen from him at every stage since joining the Fire from USL. And he's consistently been able to do it, which is just refreshing to see.
And we'll talk a little bit more about Dean and a couple other guys who really stood out last night later on. But we'll start with, I think, the prevailing question of the day, which is, are we calling this a gutsy win or the Fire almost expletiving the bed? Fire obviously cruised in the first half, but Charlotte almost got back into it with 2 quick goals in the second. They did hang on. Berhalter said after the game, it's a win where you need to dig. And he said that a game like that where we need to push and then they came back and then we had to fight is what the team needed when he gave his post-game speech to the team. Johnathan Dean also in that same little clip saying something to the effect of like, this is what great teams do. They bend, but they never break. Tim, I'll kind of toss to you to start us here on where you feel on the gutsy win, almost blew it kind of spectrum.
I mean, one of the other stories that's been kind of dogging the fire on top of not being able to win at home is not really being able to stop fairly stoppable easy goals. At least one of these was, right? And I think that the other one, maybe you don't feel as bad about, but I think that there were things that certainly could have been done better. And I think that until the team is doing those simple things consistently, it's kind of hard to say like we fought and we battled and we shut them down. It was more, you're not quite pooping the bed, but you're certainly like maybe like getting uncomfortably close to that stage. Like you may be like kneeling over the bed, like leaning over the bed. I don't know. You're getting close, right? And it's
Really
uncomfortably close. And yeah, I'm trying to use metaphor, like extend the metaphor as much as I can just to make it gross. But to me, it's really more of like, I think everyone watching it was like, oh no, the Fire are gonna do a fire here.
Yeah, Alan, you're like leaning in anticipation. How are you feeling post game?
Feeling well post game in the supporters section, probably the most bumping it's been all season. It just keeps getting better and better. I genuinely have to give a shout out to Section 8 and Sector Latino and all the other groups for really putting in the effort, especially with recent events at the last game for making the crowd bumping as always. But I mean, leaving the stadium, for the most part, we were all like, we got the win. I think the first half of the second half where Charlotte scored in quick succession, a lot of us were like, "Ooh, okay, is the Fire gonna fire?" But then as the game progressed, I felt more and more confident that the Fire were going to seal the deal with the win.
Yeah, I think it's tough to say that it's. I don't know. I think we talked about it a little bit beforehand, and where I kind of find myself is like it's both, right? But every almost crap in the bed is a gutsy win, right? They are kind of hand in hand. At the end of the year, this is going to ring as 3 points. It's going to win as +1 in the goal differential. And I don't know that it matters. I think the big thing for me is like, to your point, Alan, like a year ago, we lose this game, or the Fire lose this game, excuse me. The Fire lose this game, I think 9 times out of 10 a year ago. And these are the kind of victories that this team needs to kind of turn that narrative around. I think there's almost an aspect of this that is a little bit more mentally for some of the guys who have been here, Mauricio Pineda, Brian Gutierrez, Johnathan Dean, right? For a really good example, like it's important to get these wins where, yeah, maybe they came close to coming back, but we did hold them off. We did make the stops we needed to make, right? I mean, they only let Charlotte have 2 shots on goal in the second half, right? That's not nothing. 0.8 XG. Like, it wasn't like Charlotte was peppering him the whole time, I guess, if that makes sense. But it is a little bit, to me, in my mind at least, of it's a good turning point. It's not perfect. It's not what you want. But being able to shut down the momentum that quickly and hold on to win the game, I think goes a long way. Alan, what was it you wanted to add?
Because you said this was a game that the Fire would have probably lost or drawn last season. I mean, I would go ahead and say this is something that we could have drawn or lost earlier this season. Because I'm constantly thinking about the first home game of the season against DC, where they tied it up 2-2 at the death with a pretty spectacular goal. So it just shows how much the team has come throughout this season. Yet there are things that kind of need to, I don't want to say change, but maybe flip the script a little bit, because it can get a little bit stale, which is maybe how some of these teams are figuring out how to score goals like in quick succession.
I think in terms of the vibes, one thing that Berhalter pointed out was that after the Fire gave up the second, they really didn't look like they were going to give up a third. And I think you do have to give the team credit for that. It was 2 really quick goals. One we're going to talk about with individual performances. And then the second one just came so quickly that it was like when Charlotte were basically still riding the momentum of that first one. But then after that, it did feel pretty comfortable. I think that something that both Berhalter pointed out and that I kind of noted in the performance was it did feel like after the Fire got 3, they were taking their foot off the gas a little bit. And it felt like it just felt like in the second half, and even for the remaining part of the first half, like it did feel like the next goal, if there was one, was going to come from Charlotte. Like it was going to be 3-1, much more likely than it was ever going to be 4-0.
Yeah. And I do think there's a mental aspect to that, right? Of like, we beat this team 4-1 on their turf. We're up 3-0. This game's over. And I think in a way, like that's almost all the more impressive of like being able to kind of refocus and reattach, right? Or reattack, excuse me, and just say like, that is where we were. This is where we are. This game has changed, and now we need to adjust as well. And I think to the point I was making before, and I think to your point there, Tim, of like how Greg felt about it after the game. You watched that, like I think we've seen. There's typically some kind of post game after a win, right? Video, I should say, from the club. We've seen the attitude in there when it feels like they should have won by more, or they almost gave a game away and they didn't. This to me felt like a win. Like that, you could tell the guys felt great about it. They're celebrating Johnathan Dean for getting the ball, the game ball after the game. I think that this is going to be a much larger positive impact than a negative, however you slice it, because Charlotte's not a bad team. They're about the same level as the Fire. To hold off like that after such a disappointing loss to Philly, I think goes a long way in terms of turning the vibes back in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think that I'm not sure that I think before the season I would have said everyone thought that Charlotte are better than I think they actually are. Like people were having them like in the conversation for like second, third, or fourth in the East, and I don't think they were ever really there. But I think before the season, like in 2024, I think it's fair to say Charlotte were a better team than the Fire were. They were a cut above. I think that with the improvements from the Fire, we maybe thought that they were close. Now I think you can make a realistic argument that the Fire are, despite only being 3 points ahead because of this win of Charlotte, they are a cut above where Charlotte is, just in terms of the team performances, in terms of just what you can expect from the guys. And that's a huge turnaround. And I don't want to discount that. And like, in terms of the vibes, I mean, we like barely could talk to guys in the locker room afterwards because of how loud the playlist was going. Like these were guys that it was feeling like a party for them. So it did feel to them like they did what they needed to do and hung on and came together with that win. And that's something that Dean talked about too, was like the importance of doing that. And it's something that I think we even saw with some of what he showed us as well. So like it was a collective, I think, effort. And I think the group was happy with what happened, even though it wasn't perfect, right? And I think that they'd be the first to admit that it wasn't perfect.
Yeah, and you say it wasn't perfect, and I think that's maybe a good time to kind of transition to just a little bit of the overall performance, right? The team did switch back to mainly that 4-3-3 that we've come to know them in this Berhalter era. The continuity was in the 11 again, right? Johnathan Dean starting over Leonardo Barroso. And then I would say that classic, the Pog midfield of Pineda, Orhel, Gutierrez, the classic three up top. And then, sorry, my brain is blanking. Omar Gonzalez starting next to, or not Omar Gonzalez. I'm sorry, Sam Rogers was back. Apologies, guys. My brain is all over the place tonight or today.
2 matches in a week, man. It does a lot for you. Like it takes stuff out of you.
Amen. I said to that.
But Sam Rogers being back in the 11 to kind of bolster that back line a little bit more once again. And there were kind of two sides to the coin on that. I think first and foremost, we are seeing a little bit of strengthening in the defense, right? This is probably the best run of form of Johnathan Dean's career. We know about the season Andrew Gutman and Jack Elliott are having. And having Sam Rogers back, although he is still working his way back to maybe full of what he was, I think is still an improvement over Omar Gonzalez. Guys, feel free to correct me if you disagree. But where I think it maybe changed is maybe a little bit of, for lack of a better word, things were a little stale in the midfield, right? We saw Pineda, Orhel, Gutierrez getting a start. And Pineda and Orhel weren't poor, but they were a little not there. And Alan, you seem like you've got some stuff to say about it. So I'll kick to you in terms of thoughts watching the midfield performance last night and how that maybe held the team back or allowed some back in the second half.
So, like Tim said, 2 games in 1 week. So one thing that I saw that was similar in between both games is, as you mentioned, the midfield sort of losing a bit more battles than they should have. I felt like both Charlotte and Philly had a lot of either like 2-on-1s or even, I think, like really close 1-on-1s if if it weren't for the back line just being very quick on their feet. I think I remember right before the third goal, there was like a really good clearance by, I think it was Gutman who made a sliding tackle to prevent a shot going on target. So just that's sort of the thing that I noticed, I guess, that they're losing a few more battles in the midfield, especially near our own half, a bit more than they should be.
And I think more than just defensively, early on, the midfield was really a creator for the team, right? Like they were winning those battles. They were recovering the ball in the midfield, but also like the first pass would be to the midfield and they would work a way into basically like pulling oncoming defenders to them is like one of the pressing triggers. I think that they knew that the other team was going to have pulling guys off. And then that would then give space for someone like Joe Bamba, because there would be too many people coming into the midfield. And so there has to be one person or two people fewer somewhere else. And with that space, they would have a numerical advantage in the attacking areas and they'd play the ball long or they some other performance and get things happening that way. And we didn't really see it as much in this game. Like the ball just didn't flow through the midfield, I think, very much or very well at all. Statistically, I think that Orahel had a decent performance. I mean, he had some good long passes and stuff like that. I think that he won almost all of his, had almost 100% accurate passing for whatever that's worth. And some of them were long. Same with Mori, but they just weren't really creating. It was like passes back to one of the center backs. It was just something that wasn't really that creative. And obviously, it didn't really hurt the Fire in this game because they still got 3 goals. But I think that against a tougher opponent, the midfield is going to have to do more to create because you just can't get nothing out of that middle part of the pitch and expect to win games against tough opponents.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a couple things at play here, right? I mean, one, you look back at the stats here, right? Sergio Orahel, 5 passes into the final third. They were all accurate long balls, though, to your point there, Tim. Gosh, I'm just scrolling through the stats right now, trying to find. I don't even see anything from Mauricio Pineda. I think there's 2 things maybe at play. One, there is an aspect of we're 19 games into the season at this point. This is the most either of these guys have ever played in midfield, right, for a full year. Obviously, Sergio Orahel just frankly not playing in MLS until this year. 2, there's some tape, right? There's 18 games of tape on how this midfield wants to play. There's 18 games of tape essentially on how Mauricio Pochettino, Sergio Orahel, and Mauricio Pineda want to play together in midfield and the structures in place there, right? So Charlotte has already placed them. I wouldn't be shocked if it's Dean Smith kind of knew what he was looking for and how he wanted to attack that. The other side of the coin too, right, that I think maybe is worth discussing is looking at a guy like a Johnathan Dean, right, and like Andrew Gutman and what they're able to offer and how they're able to work through the flanks, right, and play down the side as opposed to playing through the middle of the park. As he's kind of grown more comfortable, as Gutman has continued to improve, we know the kind of year he's having. There is an aspect of, well, if they're going to try and take that away, we're not going to try and beat them over the head with it. We're just going to find our opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that the minutes is an important point, and I think that maybe we will see a little bit of rotation. But when we've seen that rotation, one, I think that sometimes there's a reason that the guys that are getting minutes are the ones that are getting minutes, both positive and negative, right?
Yeah.
Like that's something that we heard every year when the Fire were kind of like down in the standings. Why don't you play the kids? And the kids weren't getting minutes. And a lot of the time it's because the kids were not ready. And like sometimes that's just a coach's assessment and they're wrong. But most of the time it's, even if the coach isn't the best coach in the world, the kids are not ready. And to me, I think that it's more just the ideas that are coming from the midfield. And that's more, tactics and strategy than it really is individual players. Because when we've seen that rotation, it hasn't really made that much of a difference in the performances other than when there have been individual mistakes, which again are individual and not a problem with the system. So I think that it's coming up with a change in the system. I think Greg kind of knows that, which is why we saw the switch to the 4-2-2 for a large part of the game midweek. It didn't work. Maybe that's the opponent. Maybe it's more than just the opponent. Maybe it's like that it just didn't work with the group and the way that they, tried things. But I think that we do need to start seeing some different ideas how that group functions. And I think it is more in not throwing away what the team has done so successfully, but I think it's more adapting it and finding that next step, that extra wrinkle. Because if you have a couple different game plans that you can run that you feel confident in succeeding in, you can switch between them, and that alone makes you a lot less predictable.
Yeah, I mean, coaching is half preparation, half reaction, right? It's you can set up as much as you want pregame, but once the game actually starts being played, that's when you need to be able to make those adjustments. And that's kind of, I think, more the point I'm making, right? Is you have two guys in Mauricio Pineda and Sergio Orhel who have not spent a lot of time playing at this level in the midfield. They may not be quite as equipped to make those changes on a snap choice there, right? I think that might be part of the reason we saw some changes against Philadelphia and last night as well. And it's not a oh my gosh, we need to get them out of there. It's more just like that's going to come when you have two guys who are not used to playing 34 games of an MLS season as the main midfielders on a competitive team. And I think that's reasonable, right? I don't think that's out of right field or out of left field that we should say that could be something this team will have to overcome and Greg Berhalter will need to coach them out of.
So, I mean, that can be true, but I think that again, like obviously the transfer window's opening in a little bit less than a month now, I guess like 3-ish weeks. So that would be a possibility for strengthening the team. But other than that, you need guys that are pushing up. Like I think that we've seen that really well in the right back position, right? Where we've seen some good performances from Leo Barroso and then some performances that were maybe not as good. And he's also just young and adapting to the league and all that. And then we've seen excellent performances from Johnathan Dean. And so it's like, Leo can have a great performance, Dean can have a great performance, and they have to keep on pushing each other to get better because you have I think the plan was probably to start Barroso against Cincinnati as of like last week. And now I think it's like sort of is hard to take Dean out, I think, after the match that he had, right? And like that's what you want to see everywhere.
Yep.
In the midfield, we haven't been seeing that as much, right? Like, and I think that's maybe something we can talk about now. Just in terms of like, who would the other options be and like what do they give you in that position?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen Mauricio Pineda coming off at halftime in the last few games, it feels like. We'll talk about Dje D'Avilla in a minute. I don't quite get Dje D'Avilla, right? I think, well, actually, you know what? Let's talk about Dje D'Avilla a little bit, right? Let's talk about Dje D'Avilla coming off coming on in the second half for Mauricio Pineda. An interesting choice, right? I kind of made a joke before the show started. Stop trying to make Dje D'Avilla happen. It's not happening. We've alluded to the fact that, hey, maybe he should get some run with fire to get comfortable in the system. But I would say in terms of our notable performances and notorious performances, he is certainly on the back half of that. And it's limited a little bit of the flexibility that we would have in midfield on a week in, week out basis.
Yeah. I mean, he had a pretty rough performance. I asked Greg Berhalter about what he thought. I mean, and it was, did sort of change the vibe of things in the press conference, but I felt that I had to because I think he was directly responsible for the first goal. It was like he just was not defending on that first performance, and like if he was anywhere near Pep Biel, like that goal probably doesn't happen. And then watching the match again, I think that there were things that he could have done defending to kind of keep Tokolamati out of it a little bit. So not as directly responsible, but certainly a passenger, I think, with both goals. And what Berhalter said after the match was that basically he's a young player and needs opportunities to prove that he can play at this level and compete at this level. He does some things extremely well, and we want to continue to work with him and develop him. That's not exactly high praise, and it doesn't take a lot of like reading between the lines to say that he's not really living up to expectations. I mean, and he's a young player thing, right? Like he's 22 years old. Like he's not 18. He's not 17 coming up from the academy. He is a 22-year-old player that came here for somewhere in the vicinity of $4 to $5 million, right? Like we're not talking about someone that they found off by the side of the road kicking a ball around and we're like, you look good doing that. Like, why don't you come play with us? He's an expensive signing coming in, and I have not seen a lot from him this season. A couple flashes early on, but I think that's it.
I like the term that Tim used, passenger, because watching, first of all, when both goals happened, I was not paying attention because of we were just bumping in the supporter section, and then all of a sudden people got quiet and I was like, what just happened? And then I saw and I was like, oh, they scored. It sometimes is difficult.
You think that maybe you were distracting Dje on that? He was getting ready to go bumping with you.
Yeah, and
the shirt off to him.
Yeah. Well, the shirt coming off came later.
The glare in his eyes.
What is that? It's so bright.
Thank you. What was I going to say? Passenger. That's correct. That looking back, he was in it for the ride. All the other players were in their positions, sort of like either marking the player or like covering the area they're supposed to. Well, it felt like he was almost shutting down, especially in the first goal. It's sort of like he was running back, and then once he got near the box, he sort of turned off. And then for the second goal, there was just sort of this wide open space, and you can definitely tell when you pause it, if you want the exact timing, at 58 minutes, 17 seconds, that he should be a lot closer to his man. So passenger is definitely the correct term, or the term that I would also use.
And he could have been, right? Like he could have been a lot closer. He was having a walk in the park. And I think that's what it looked like. And I think that it's like what I'm not trying to like, look, it's an individual moment. The game happens quick, especially when you're on the pitch. You come in at half, you've got to adjust to the pace of the game. He hadn't played in about a month. So like all of those are factors, and I don't want to discount that. But
at the same time,
it just feels like you have to be more locked in when you're on the side, like when you're, getting thrown into the game. And he was probably told at halftime that he was coming in. It wasn't like an unexpected substitution because of an injury where he was coming in from a completely cold start, right? He was warming up at the end of the first half.
And
so it was just disappointing from him. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Finish thought, Tim.
Yeah, I think it was just disappointing. It was a disappointing performance from him. And I don't think we saw any of that other stuff that we talked about in terms of like new ideas with how to spring the ball forward through the midfield coming from him either. So it really did kind of feel like we were not really getting much from him that was positive whatsoever. And we were getting a number of actual negatives.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his profile, it isn't meant to be the guy who springs the ball forward, right? He's kind of that destroyer six meant to disrupt play and win the ball back to then, hit an outlet.
Which is
and
what
this is
not do.
What did you say, Alan?
Sorry, I was sort of like talking to myself. I said it was that is exactly what the midfield did not do, especially over the last two games.
Yeah, 100%. So like, I do understand the idea of like wanting the profile in there. But how many times are we going to put that in and watch him kind of not single-handedly cost a game, but maybe single-handedly cost a goal, right? Which is, I don't think it's like crazy for me to say that's a pretty regular occurrence when he's in the game at this point. And it does, again, make you wonder. We talked a lot about Kellyn Acosta and what's going on there. And I understand he's also an expensive player, and we talked about him being a little bit invisible on the field. I'd rather have you be invisible than visible for the wrong reasons, right? And he's competent. I think he's looked better in recent weeks. And so I do wonder how much more leash Dje D'Avilla will have, because Kellyn Acosta has looked better. He's looked like the clear, right now, fourth midfielder with Romani Kwame still on the injury list. So yeah, I don't love the overall performances. And if you want somebody who can play a little more defensive minded, if Kellyn's willing to do that to get his spot back, I don't know how much longer the rope for Dje will be. Hopefully he can turn that around, but it doesn't seem to be trending. Like, it's not getting better. I don't know how to say that. Like, and with Leo, it's like you see some negatives, but you also see the positives mixed in there, even when he has a bad game. I don't think I can sit here and tell you guys I have positive of Dje D'Avilla's game at this point.
No, I mean,
other than his physical skill, like his physical traits, which is he's big, he's tall, he's fast. That doesn't really mean much when we're talking about this role, right?
Right. Like it's not athletics events in the Olympics, right? Where like you can just do one of those things or some combination of those things and get gold medals. Like you have to play a soccer game.
And you can't even like transition. You can't even say, oh, he would play better as a center back because he doesn't have the awareness to play center back. Right.
As mentioned. Yeah.
Right. Right. He doesn't have he hasn't shown the awareness, right? And I think that's
Yes.
the one thing
Yes,
I
that's
do
a
want to
correct
temper. Like, we've been negative on his performance so far. He's played 200 minutes in MLS, right? Like, he's adjusting to
Absolutely.
living. Like, he has moved continents before. Like, he's moved from Africa to Europe, but this is the second time that he's moving continents, and he's changing time zones, and he's farther from his support network and stuff like that than he was before in terms of being able to call family and stuff on time. So, like, that can be difficult as well. And he's played 200 minutes, right? So I'm hoping that we can start to see a lot more. It's just a more veteran player that came in, on loan in the midfield. Romani Kwame comes in a little bit earlier, and he made impacts within like touches, like 5 touches into his time in MLS, he was scoring goals. And like, not every player is going to do that, no matter how good they are. But you could see the impact that he could make for the team instantly. And I think we haven't seen it from him. But it's only been 200 minutes. It's a long-term investment in Dje, right? Like, you don't spend $4.5 million, $5 million, whatever it was exactly, on a guy and give him a contract, I believe, through, I want to say 2028. If you don't believe in his potential. Now, no team gets 100% of the signings right, but so far since Berhalter has come in, the Fire have gotten most of their signings to be hits, right? Like, we've talked about so many of those guys this season. So I think that it's, we've seen this, but let's just give him some more time before we pass final judgments.
100%. And I think that's the point I've made a couple times now, is like, I would really like to see him play some minutes with Fire too at this point. And just
I'm not 100% eligible, sure if he's eligible, just given he's on a U22 deal and the amount of money that he makes. Yeah. So, and we don't know, it could be in the contract. I would doubt it. I think that it's that he may not be eligible to, except as like what we're seeing from Chase Gasper, where it's like a conditioning stint.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a larger conversation about MLS roster rules and why they're stupid and oftentimes don't actually help players. But we'll move on.
Okay, they're
there.
stupid. That's the short version.
Yeah, we'll move on from there and stop talking about our notorious and start talking about our notable. It excites me that I'm not the one who wrote this note down, but it literally says Johnathan Dean. That's it. That's the tweet. Another really solid performance from Dean on that right back spot. He's, I think, right now playing the best ball of his career, and honestly, the best we've seen out of a Fire right back in a long time. I'll say that. Got the game ball from Greg Berhalter last night after Greg basically made the comment of like 2 games against Wilfried Zaha, who, despite all our joking and prodding, is a high-level attacking player. And both times he wound up spending the night in Johnathan Dean's pocket. So a really strong performance from him there, and one, to your point, Tim, that is kind of forced his way into the starting lineup. It's tough to justify putting him on the bench from here.
Yeah, which again, like, we've seen a lot of positive stuff in Barroso. I think that the team invested in him because they believe in that talent, and I think that'll be an interesting thing to see developing. But it's just, Dean has consistently punched above, like, he's hit levels that are above the level that I think that people thought he would have, right? Like, Souquet was not a great player in that position in this league, but he was a player coming from the top flight in France and making 5 or 6 times what Dean makes, and the expectations were that Dean would be a bench option, and he pushed himself into the starting 11 time and time again. And now he's doing it with Barroso. I don't know if that'll last forever. There's going to be minutes to go around, right? And we've seen versatility with Dean positioning, but like, his game has grown so much. We've talked about it enough. Like, he both was a shutdown defender, like taking Wilfried Zaha, pretty much completely out of the game. And that was impressive, but we are also still seeing his ability to go forward. So like, I can't say enough good things about what we've seen from his game growing. Like, he used to just run up and down the touchline and fling off crosses occasionally. Part of that was probably the tactics in the team in those years. But now we're seeing him be more creative. We're seeing him play more confidently, even under pressure. It just has been really good to see.
100%. Alan, anything you want to kick in there?
It's Johnathan Dean, man. It's everything. It's everything and more, honestly. Like, I'm sorry, but like,
dude, he's Johnathan Dean.
It's Johnathan Dean. Like, I remember, what was it, on Wednesday? I remember fans being like, "Guys, we got to get Johnathan Dean on," and then he came on, and we were like, "Yeah!" So I mean, he's very much a fan favorite, and especially after that game. I mean, I always just think of the the picture you have with the crown on his head in the herald stricken jersey. Like, I mean, it's
That's fun. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean,
incredible.
so, and it's not just us that are saying this. So like we did ask about Dean after the match. And this isn't the complete comment, but one thing that Greg Berhalter said about him was that he's the guy that I think embodies the culture and spirit of this group. A guy who puts his head down and works hard and doesn't complain and is a really good teammate.
Look, not to once again plug something selfishly. Again, as I mentioned before, we did an episode with a Swedish podcast that talks about MLS, and they asked, "Who's your favorite player?" And I said, "Oh well," kind of explained the where it started, and now it's like, but you look at who this guy is, and he really does embody what it means to play for Chicago Fire. It's coming from nothing. This is a guy who played at Wofford College, who had to go to USL Championship because that's where his level was. Came here on a flyer, has worked his ass off, and is now setting himself up nicely for an extension or a new contract in MLS next year. And, he's not going to be making life-changing money necessarily, but he's now taken himself from a guy who was playing professional soccer in USL, who knows how long that's going to last, to could he sign a 2 or 3 year deal with a club option for Chicago Fire or another team this winter? I think he could. I think there's a real chance that he's a guy who could forge a nice MLS career for himself. And that's great for the work ethic he's shown.
For sure. Brian Gutierrez, by the way, just said he's a workhorse, man. Like that was basically the quote. So yeah, it's great to see it. And something that Frank Klopas said, like, say what you want about him as a coach, and we said plenty on it. You can go back and find some sadder episodes than this one from 2024 or 2023 if you want that. But he understands what the Chicago Fire identity is. And last year he said that it's easy to see why he was a fan favorite, because he's like he said, blue collar guy, hardworking guy that just like basically, this isn't the quote. He said the other stuff was a quote, but I can't remember the rest of it. It basically was what we've said so many times already. Like he works hard, and it's easy for Fire fans. Like Fire fans love cheering for guys like that, because I think that just is the culture of not just like the Fire, but also like the city, right? Of like, people, like, it's a city that values hard work and putting your head down and getting the job done. And that's what he's done.
100%. And just kind of moving up the right side, right? The other notable I think we need to mention, the most valuable Philip, Zinkernagel, of course. Another outstanding performance, a goal and an assist. He's got 8 and 8 on the year. I think I made the comment to both of you at some point, like, if you're putting together an MLS MVP ballot, it's hard not to include Philip Zinkernagel somewhere on that list. He's having an outstanding season, and we saw last night just another encapsulation of that. I don't know if anything you guys want to add on his performance and what the season has looked like so far.
I mean, I've been calling it the Fire's like MVP for him, the Fire's MVP for it seems like months now, and he just keeps on kind of hitting another level. It's really refreshing to see, and I think that maybe we're seeing what we thought we'd see from Bamba from Zink more than we're seeing it from Bamba sometimes. I think part of that's just fatigue from Bamba and some of the other stuff. Like Bamba's getting double or triple teamed. I don't know why. And you can't triple team 2 guys in the attack, right? Like there's not enough players. And so I think maybe that's part of it, but he just looks like such a good signing. And at 30 years old, I think one of the comments that I got from somebody was, why was he signed for 4 years, right? And I think this is why, right? He's easily worth 2 or 3 times what he's making this year for the Fire. So I think even if his performances do really drop off, which they very well may not, and he has enough different clubs in his bag where he can shift his game from what we're seeing now and do less running and still be effective. But you will have gotten your money's worth out of him really early on in this deal if we see much more at all of what we've seen so far.
Workhorse. An absolute workhorse he is. And
I mean, that's the other thing. Yeah, like he's also one of those.
Yeah, and thinking from a league perspective, I know people who maybe aren't MLS sickos like we are will probably overlook him because of the fact that it is the Chicago Fire and they're not a team that's obviously talked a lot out in this league. But I feel like more and more people are like, oh, wow. I mean, not only that, they're like, look at this team that's being assembled by Triple G, but they're like, look at that guy who is MVP. And I mean, he made the All-Star game. He was chosen for the All-Star game for a reason. So
Yeah.
As a coach's selection, right? Which like I think that like we can talk about this a little bit more. We talked about it a little bit, but like it's one thing to be, voted in from the fans, and I think that recognition's great. But I think that you get a lot of guys. It's literally a popularity contest at that point. Commissioners' picks, I think, are sometimes political, sometimes nostalgia, sometimes like, legitimately like for the history of the game, the league. Like I think that's how the Fire got into the All-Star game the last time there was a representative from the team there. But I think coaches' selections in some ways, especially if it's not from the coach's team, it's in some ways, I think, the best statement, right, to how to make it into the All-Star game, because it's a coach that is trying to play a game for fun, but also like against League MX, like you're playing to win. And he's picking the guys that he thinks can help him win, that we're not going to get voted in. And so it's the most meritorious way, in some ways at least, of getting into the All-Star game.
And the Fire posted just recently that he is the fastest player to reach the mark of 8 goals and 8 assists in a single season since 98. So,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he's if I'm remembering correctly, I think it's the fastest in club history. I could be wrong about that, Alan, but it's been really.
Yes, fastest since Roman Kosecki who did it in 22 games.
Yeah. And he didn't play in all 19 matches, right? So really impressive stuff from Phil. The last one we'll mention quickly before we kind of wrap up here. Another really, really solid game from Brian Gutierrez. He had a goal, was a creative force in the midfield. Tim, you want to give me your quick hits on Guti's performance and how that makes you feel going into Cincinnati?
Yeah, so this is going to be in the 5 things that will be up by the time that you're hearing this, but it's refreshing to feel like Guti's back, right? Like I think there were some real questions going in, and then getting that second red card. I was a little bit concerned about his attitude. We were starting to hear some things, like some grumblings that are typically the things that coaches say when they're making excuses for a guy, like about he's young and stuff like that. He's back. He had a strong performance. 2 games this week. I think he had one of the best performances for the Fire on Wednesday. He had one of the best performances for the Fire against Charlotte. And it's good to see him starting to influence games like that. And it's good to see him feeling like he's sometimes becoming kind of like a leader on the pitch, just with the way that he's playing. Because we haven't really seen that from him. Like he's sometimes like picked up the temperature of the group around him. I think against Charlotte, we saw some stuff from him where he was playing out of pressure, I think, better than the team was, especially when the game was 0-0 and it was pretty close for that first stretch. And that's really refreshing to see. We still haven't seen him like take the team on his back and like give them a win that the team, I think, would have gotten if he was out of the lineup necessarily. He, in this game, he didn't have to, because there were so many strong performances from other guys. And I think that that's like what you want to see, is you don't have to have one guy win a game for you because everyone's in the game to win it. But I think that maybe that's something we will have to see from him coming up, which we'll talk about when we preview those matches. But, it's really refreshing to see him kind of back to the level that we hoped he would be at. And now with more goals than he's ever had in MLS.
Yeah, 100%. Alan, anything you want to toss in on Guti before we wrap up?
He listened to the podcast when we were talking about him previously and how we were saying that his what exactly did we say? We said something around the lines of that his growth has kind of stifled and it's sort of plateaued. And I think he was like, oh, hell no. And just decided to prove us wrong coming back.
Yeah, which is what the team hoped for when they gave him that contract, right? And honestly, it's really good to see. It really looks like the team are on track to have at least 2 double-digit goal scorers for the first time since 2019. And they could have 3. And I honestly can't remember off the top of my head the last time that happened. I want to say it was maybe the 2013 season.
If only we had a certain
2012 or
Floridian that
2010
knew
or
all
something like
this
that.
information.
Yeah, I know. Where's DJ when you need him? But it's been a very long time since the Fire have had 3, and it could realistically happen this season because, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of imagination, right? Like,
I think you'd be very surprised if they don't, right? 2 more goals for Phil, 3 more goals for Guti in 15 games. I don't think that's like a crazy ask or
It's
expectation.
entirely possible.
I think the
And I
asterisk is do we get 15 more games out of Guti, which is maybe a little, sad, not sad, but
So
you
are
do
you
sort of
reporting
wonder if. Well, no, not reporting anything here.
No,
there have been rumors swirling around with Guti. I think that it's. I mean, look, the team probably would like to sell somebody for, cap reasons and stuff like that to get the GAM that they didn't get from sales in previous seasons. There's only so many guys that you think could really bring in significant money. I think that in some ways, like we talked about this when Guti was not performing as well, but could a move be what he needs to help his development? Like, could being with the Fire in an environment that's very familiar to him after growing up with the club and in the city that he grew up in and all that, could it be holding him back from kind of just like doing some of the growing up things, right? That a lot of people have to do when they go away for a job or for college or whatever. And so it could be good for him. I mean, I don't think that he's going to play his entire career in a Chicago Fire uniform. I think that if he does, it would be kind of a failure in some parts in his mind. At the same time, I hope that he does become a dominant player for the Fire. I mean, he could always come back, right? If he leaves, though.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that feels like as good a place as any to wrap it. I think we'll hopefully have some more transfer news as the years go, or as the weeks go by here as we get closer to the window. The only thing I would add, Tim, is I think if they can win that quarterfinal against Minnesota, I think the likelihood that Brian Gutierrez remains till the end of the season becomes a little bit higher. I think, to your point, I think this is his home. This is his like hometown club. This is the only place he's known. I think if you kind of walk into that the end of this season with the opportunity to win a trophy before you leave, I think that holds a little weight. Maybe it doesn't, and maybe you can't blame him if it doesn't. But I think it might. So just an interesting thought there. But that is as good a place as any to actually wrap this up
one
here.
quick note, because I've done a DJ in the time that we've had. The Chicago Fire have never had 3 players with double-digit goals in a single season. So, we could be on
Cincinnati.
Let's go.
Yeah. Or it could just take 1 more goal and then 2 more hat tricks from our favorite.
2 more hat tricks
from Tom Barlow, or 10 Johnathan Dean goals in the next 4 games. 2.5 goals a game. Can't be that hard.
Or 5 goals in 2 games. Lots of different ways to count to 10 people.
Yeah. Or 2 goals in 5 games, right, Tim?
Oh, man. This is the point where the podcast...
Or 10 goals in 1 game.
If Johnathan Dean scores 10 goals in 1 game, I will... I don't know. I'll
we haven't been drinking. I don't know what our excuse is, guys. I'm sorry for...
Yeah. But no, that's as good a place as any to wrap it up here. Thank you so much again for joining us here around the Bonfire. We'll be back later this week for the preview as the Chicago Fire go on to Cincinnati to face DeAndre Yedlin and co. Shout out DeAndre Yedlin. But we'll be back for the preview there. As I mentioned before, really cool opportunity to speak with Johan Dykhoff of Soccer Baroon. It's a Swedish soccer podcast that talks all about North American sports. So you'll see that out later this week as well. That is us on his show, not vice versa. So just keep an eye on the socials for that. We'll put it out there. It was a really cool conversation with a guy who's been following the league for 15 years from a couple thousand miles away. So just kind of an interesting perspective there. And then, as always, you can stay tuned on the site. You'll have Tim's 5 things coming out today, so it'll be ready whenever you're listening to it. You'll have other stories from Alex and from Max that are always kind of coming out there. So stay tuned for all the news and updates, all that kind of fun stuff. And then, as always, stay tuned to the socials, Men in Red 97. That's where you can find us on Twitter, on Instagram, on all the social medias that you use to stay connected to all things Chicago Fire. Yeah, and I think that just about does us there. So thank you so much for joining us around the Bonfire. It's been a pleasure, and come on, you Men in Red.